While 2 years into Russia's invasion, exhausted Ukrainians refuse to give up. And with the recent developments in Israel and Gaza and the ICJ action, Republican doubters now in the US are said to be hindering Ukraine's ability to fight by blocking billions of dollars worth of military aid, with Kyiv saying more frontline troops are dying as a result of weapons shortages. And still, with the ruling that Russia should cease military action in Ukraine, 19,000 children taken from Ukraine are still unaccounted for. So what has been achieved and what is the end game for both countries? You might wonder. Well, for this discussion, we've roped in Thembisa Fakude, Senior Research Fellow and Director at Afri-Asia Dialogue. Thembisa, thank you so much. As always, welcome and thank you for your time. Look, let's start here. What do you think then is the end game for both Russia and the Ukraine? Nobody's backing down, and 2 years in, bodies are piling up, yet no solution in sight, owing to the fact that the idea of compromise or concession to Russia is also viewed as defeat.
Well, you know what's the end game for the Russians? Russians are willing to go all the way with this, because anything other than victory will be an embarrassment to Vladimir Putin and is likely to weaken him at home. On the other hand, Ukraine is dependent on the supply of arms, both from the European Union and the Americans. So with Trump likely to come in, the Ukrainians are very concerned about that, because Trump has made it very clear that it's not going to be easy for him to deal with Ukraine. Trump is a transactional president. You'll have to get something from the Ukrainians in exchange of arms, whereas the Europeans are also getting a bit hesitant, given that there are also public pressure and elections that are about to take place. And many of these governments that are likely to come in, including Trump, by the way, are looking at strengthening the relationships with Vladimir Putin. So it's bad news for the Ukrainians if they don't get the arms that they've been waiting for. If the political power shift in Europe continues to go to the right, you are likely to have the Ukrainians losing support, and at the same time, if Trump does come in, you're certainly going to have a different political attitude towards Ukraine from the presence of Donald Trump.
Now, Thembisa, a lot of people might ask then, what has Russia achieved in its invasion of the Ukraine? Do you feel that any positive gains were gained besides the initial reasons, of course, for the invasion?
Well, other than the resuscitation of the arms industry in Russia, nothing has been achieved. Instead, they've invited more and more intensified sanctions. At the moment, they can't even import screws from nails and screws from Europeans and Americans. So the nails are biting. Biden came up with additional set of sanctions after the killing or the death of Alexei Navalny last week. So the situation is getting much more dire for the Russians. But Vladimir Putin somehow has managed to garner new national support, because he's now seen as a strong man who's standing firm against Western domination. But secondly, I think, as I've said, the only thing or industry that has benefited from this is the arms industry in Russia and nothing else.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Thembisa, because recently the Russian foreign minister reiterated that this war was actually funded and aided by the West, and that they remain resolute in their campaign to rid themselves of Western as well as outside influence, who have a sponsored agenda, they say, that seeks to meddle in sovereign states and their disputes for personal gain.
Well, indeed. But, I mean, Russians, well, they claim that they want to push back on Ukraine because Ukraine is seeking to expand and is seeking, of course, to make new friends. Those friends are likely to threaten the regional stability, because when Ukraine, which is not going to happen, join NATO, you are likely, therefore, to have NATO knocking at the door of Russia. But we know what has happened since with Sweden and Finland, who are now the two latest. And they also share a border with Russia. Those are the two new members of NATO after Turkey sanctioned and agreed to the membership of both. They've stalled a bit with Sweden, but that has now been confirmed. Now the question is, why is Russia and Vladimir Putin not complaining nor threatening to attack both Finland and Sweden? So the rationale that was given in the first place now simply doesn't make sense anymore.
Look, now the very highly profiled issue of the 19,000 or so children that were reportedly taken to Russia, and apparently nobody knows what has become of their fate yet. The Russians have repeatedly stated that these children were removed solely for their own safety, so as they were not casualties in the war. What do you make of this situation?
Well, that was one of the pretexts that was used to take Vladimir Putin to court. But let us not forget that it was Russians who decided to go and invade Ukraine. It was not the other way around. And the reason why they invaded Ukraine, if you still remember, all of us, is that Ukraine indicated that they might likely to make new friends. And those friends, unfortunately, were not in the liking of Russia. So Russia still remained an aggressor in this regard. Whatever way you look at it, they went into Ukraine. Ukraine is still not a member. Ukraine hasn't applied for NATO membership. But Russia went on to invade Ukraine, and Ukraine pushed back, and of course, because it's a weak country, which has been, by the way, weakened by the fact that it sits geopolitically in a much more precarious geographical area, being the front state to NATO membership and also to Russia. So they went on to garner friends and invite them to assist in their fight against Russia after being invaded. So most of the political and social cultural woes that Russia finds themselves is because of their own doing. Their own expansionist ambition has led to all sorts of scapegoats used against them by the West in order to further suppress Russia's might and threat in the region. So the 19,000 kids that were apparently abducted by Russia, and Russia argues, of course, that it was for their own good, in inverted commas, notwithstanding that good parents were complaining about those kids. We don't know what has happened. All we know is that because of that, Russia has been taken to The Hague at the ICJ for complaints and also to force them to bring back the children that were abducted.
And Thembisa, then, with nobody seemingly, willing to back down, how do you think this whole impasse will end?
Well, I think the end is likely with Ukraine losing the war. Is likely with Ukraine accepting that some of its country will be annexed, as it's been the case. I don't think Russia is now looking at further capturing more additional, other than fighting and pushing back in the areas where it initially captures. Now it's fighting back to maintain those areas. I don't think there's any, at least in the short term, expansionist idea by Russia. So until Ukraine is out of all of those areas where Russia has since claimed from February 22, even before that in 2014, including Crimea, if Ukraine accept that those territories are gone and they are willing to surrender those territories, you are likely, therefore, to have some sort of truce. But also, I think the Russians are looking at Trump, and Trump is likely, of course, to bring some sort of peace. I don't think that peace is going to be in favor of the Ukrainians, but is likely to convince the Ukrainians, particularly if the Americans are not willing to give more arms, to give up the territory and start organizing themselves within the new reality of the geography of Ukraine.
It all remains to be seen. Thank you so much for that. That is Thembisa Fakude, the Senior Research Fellow and Director at Africa-Asia Dialogues. They're weighing in on the 2-year-old Russia versus Ukraine war.